A Cowgirl's Secret. By Melinda Curtis. Prologue. Don't be shy, they said. They being the Diaz family, encouraging Cassie Diaz to be brave. Stick to horses, they said. They being Cassie's brother and grandfather. Grow up, they said. Okay, maybe that last one was Cassie's. Cassie was 29, and for the first time in her life, she was getting on a bull in a rodeo competition. Her family was going to be very proud of her. If Cassie survived this ride. The bull she'd drawn was Tornado Tom, a blue-gray beast that had dumped more cowboys than had lasted 8 seconds on his back. This end of July rodeo was his first go-round with a cowgirl. History was about to be made by both of them. And hopefully, she'd add to her footnote in history by winning a much-needed purse. Cassie lowered herself on Tornado Tom's broad muscular back and nodded toward the cowboy operating the gate. Chapter 1. I told you so, Cassie. Cassie's brother, Rhett, shook his head. Cassie dropped her saddle back on the stand, having only lifted it a few inches. She leaned on the horn and cantle, trying to ease the pain that stretched from the top of her hip to her inner thigh. Don't start. Don't tell her she shouldn't have tried bull riding. Don't tell her she should have stuck to horse training. Don't tell her horse training wasn't going to pay the bills. There came a point in every young woman's life where she had to accept that some dreams were never coming true, hers being making a decent living training horses. At this point, unless she won the lottery, she needed to set aside girlish dreams and get a real job, whatever that was. Cassie wasn't ready. And honestly, she might never be. Rhett chuckled. You winning that purse was a long shot, kind of like Grandpa winning the lottery with that ticket he buys every week. Exactly. And here we go, Cassie muttered, glancing at Baby, the quarter horse she'd been trying to saddle when a spasm from her bull-beaten hip sidelined her. Rhett is on a roll. Indeed I am. Rhett tipped up his black cowboy hat and grinned. I'm surprised you can walk after that bull stomped on your hip. The emergency room doctor had been surprised, too. Not that she'd beaten all odds. The orthopedic specialist had given some grim news. News Cassie hadn't shared with her family because you never should have gotten on that bull, sis. Because of that. Cassie gritted her teeth and stared at the barn rafters at the bar D. She hadn't told her family she was considering giving up the ranching life, partly because it was terrifying, and partly because no one in her family had ever given up ranching life, not in 5 generations. She continued to stare at the rafters, settling her cowboy hat more firmly on her head. There were cobwebs up there that needed tending to, if one was bothered by such things, which she was, unlike Rhett, who tended to go through life as happy with a tidy environment as a messy one. He preferred to spend his time on extreme experiences, like ziplining and bungee jumping off bridges. Cassie's gaze drifted back down to the photo gallery on the wall behind her brother. During a streak of good luck and flush bank accounts, her father had insulated the Bar D's barn, which came in handy 5 or 6 months out of the year when Second Chance, Idaho, was snowed in. But because the insulation had to be held in with something, he'd installed cheap wood paneling. And because the paneling was so very bare in the breezeway, he'd hung pictures of Rhett and Cassie competing in rodeos when they were kids, Rhett in calf and trick roping, Cassie in barrel racing and trick riding. Back when I thought that's what I'd do with the rest of my life, cowgirling. Like horse training or trick riding offered a health plan and retirement benefits. How naive she'd been. Those pictures had been taken before Cassie's parents decided to take a job managing someone else's ranch in Wyoming and handed back the reins of the Bar D to Grandpa Diaz. Before Cassie began keeping the Bar D's books and worrying about making ends meet. Although Rhett looked at the bank balance every month, for some reason he never worried. That made Cassie both annoyed and envious. I'm headed into town. Grandpa Diaz walked into the barn, gray felt cowboy hat as dirty as if he'd been tossed in the rodeo arena. He gave her a gap-toothed grin, having had some teeth kicked out the last time he went competitive bronc riding 20-some years ago. Want to come with me, Cassie? She sure does. Rhett untied Baby and led him back to his stall, boot heels kicking up dust. She needs to shake off that injury. Grandpa gave Cassie an assessing glance. As the only female in 2 generations of the family, Cassie had always been measured by a cowboy yardstick. Still? No, Cassie straightened, albeit slowly. But I'll drive you into town. Grandpa's latest diabetes medicine had given him the shakes. The old man was beginning to need extra care. A few minutes later, Cassie sat behind the wheel of her pickup, wishing she'd bought a new set of shocks instead of entering that bull riding competition a week ago. She felt every bump on the pine tree-lined driveway out to the highway. Should I ask why you're going into town? Is this another coffee date? Ever since he declared himself semi-retired, Grandpa had become very popular with the females of Second Chance. Nope. I heard a new Monroe is in town. Cassie rolled her eyes. Harlan Monroe had bought out Second Chance a decade ago, including the Bar D. He'd turned around and charged everyone he'd bought from who wanted to stay a $1 a year lease, hoping to give a leg up to citizens and keep his hometown from becoming a ghost town. Earlier this year, Harlan's death meant that ownership of Second Chance passed to his 11 living adult grandchildren plus one. The plus one since 2-year-old Poppy inherited in place of her deceased dad. The future of those with leases in town was uncertain, including the Diaz family and the Bar D. It was why Cassie had entered a women's bull riding contest. They needed money in case they were evicted come January 1st. And now she needed money for hip surgery. Talk about out of the frying pan and into the fire. This Monroe fella is supposed to be an engine builder. Grandpa sounded enthusiastic. Cassie couldn't imagine why. I've been thinking. Here comes another one of Grandpa's wild ideas. We've got all those kiddie carnival rides in the second barn, just sitting there rusting. Maybe this fella can get them working again. Cassie blew out a breath. Why? Folks used to pay good money for their kids to ride them. But not in the past 20 years, and not in Second Chance. Her parents and grandparents used to take those kiddie rides on the road 6 or 7 months out of the year, providing entertainment at fairs, rodeos and carnivals around the West, keeping the Bar D afloat. Grandpa tilted his hat at a jaunty angle. It's time to hedge our bets. Fixing up those rides will cost us money they couldn't afford to lose. Not to mention the strong backs required to move them from fair to fair every few days. Grandpa waved a hand. These Monroes are donating a lot of time and resources to help folks in Second Chance. I bet this Monroe fella will help us for free. Cassie said nothing. Her luck recently hadn't been bet-worthy.
Shoulders hunched, Bentley Monroe sat on the couch in the lobby of the lodgepole Inn and held onto his tea mug with both hands, trying to make his 6'2" frame small enough not to get kicked or stepped on. A preteen girl leaped past, wearing pink ballet slippers, pink tights, a pink leotard and a pink tutu. Classical music filled the room. Bentley thought it was a song from the Nutcracker. But he also thought the would-be ballerina danced more like a frozen tin soldier than a delicate sugar plum fairy. Then again, what did he know? Being a bachelor and a man who'd worked on boat construction and marine engines most of his adult life, Bentley was out of his element. Gabby, the pink preteen, came to a stop near the far wall and then headed back doing slow-motion turns in a wobbly line, strawberry blonde ponytail winging through the air. Laurel, look at me. Laurel? Laurel. This cannot be happening. Instead of looking at her stepdaughter, Bentley's cousin Laurel gave him a dirty look from beneath a lock of loopy red hair in need of a brushing. Hope is 2 months old. She's already under your spell, Bentley. And all you're doing is sitting there. Bentley nodded. It was true. The tiny baby's feet pedaled in his direction. Earlier, her twin sister, Hazel, had done the same thing. And all he was doing was sitting, wondering where his sister was, pondering his return to the workforce and drinking tea. Laurel. Gabby leaped, shaking the floorboards of the historic inn as she landed. Watch me. Laurel wrapped a yellow baby blanket tighter around Hope's stretching toes. Wyatt's coming for a visit next week, and if the twins prefer you to their biological father, he'll be upset. Bentley nodded. That was most likely true, too. I can't help it. Laurel huffed. For someone who claims not to like kids and animals. I never said I don't like them. That statement had been made by Bentley's cousin Holden decades ago. Somehow the label had stuck. Laurel huffed again. Laurel. Gabby came to a stop in front of Bentley with a wobble and an unfocused look in her eyes that had Bentley reaching out to steady her until the dizziness subsided. "I'm good." The preteen blushed and flounced backward to sit on the raised stone hearth in front of a massive, centuries-old cooking fireplace. Laurel. From her position next to Bentley on the couch, Laurel glanced up at Gabby with a distracted smile. "I'm sorry, Gabs." Hope was squirming. She adjusted Hope's tiny body, tucking in her arms. "Do it again. I promise to watch this time." "Again?" Bentley muttered, drawing his heels back against the couch. "Again," Laurel said firmly. From the apartment behind the check-in desk, Hope's twin sister, Hazel, let out a cry, followed by a near-shouted plea from Laurel's husband, Mitch. "Honey?" Laurel's brow clouded. She half-turned, raising her arms as if about to hand Bentley the baby. Outside the inn, an engine of some sort chugged, sputtered, and died. It was music to Bentley's ears. "Sounds like trouble." Bentley left his tea mug on the coffee table and bolted for the door, eager to escape upset babies and ballerina-in-training tramplings. A truck had pulled up to the garage bay attached to Second Chance's general store. Mackenzie, the brunette who ran the place, approached the truck with a pleasant smile. Before he left the porch, Bentley was waylaid by his cousin Shane, who'd moved to Second Chance when they'd inherited the town in January. He'd encouraged all Monroes in their generation to visit Second Chance. Several had moved to town or created second homes here. Bentley didn't plan to follow suit, intending to stay in town only until his estranged sister made an appearance. He was Philadelphia-born, raised and loyal. Go Flyers. Go Sixers. Go Eagles. Shane looked Bentley up and down. "Why do you look so on edge?" Bentley backtracked, opened the inn's door a crack so that Shane could hear the classical music and then just as quickly closed it again. "Say no more." Shane held up his hands. "I heard Gabby was taking ballet lessons online." Bentley headed down the porch stairs. "She's been dancing around the inn nonstop. Since he'd arrived 2 days ago. Up the creaky stairs. Down the log-lined hallways. Across the antique-filled lobby and back." Shane matched Bentley step for step. They were of the same height with the same frame and dark brown hair. They also bore a vague family resemblance in their chins and noses. But they couldn't have dressed more differently. Shane in his business casual, khakis, black polo and leather loafers. Bentley in his everyday wear, blue jeans, navy t-shirt and work boots. Gabby is sharp as a tack academically, Shane told him. It galls her that she isn't a natural at anything physical. She'll be practicing until she becomes a prima ballerina or gives it up altogether. Bentley watched Mackenzie ask the driver to try starting the truck once more. "If she was my kid." "Which she's not." Shane sked. "Take my advice and stay out of it. Laurel just gave birth to twins, just got married and became a stepmom. Think Mama Grizzly and approach any topic that isn't gushingly complimentary about Gabby or the twins with caution." The truck engine chugged, coughed and caught, running like a gassed athlete on the last leg of a marathon. Bentley's mind spun through the most likely scenarios: clogged air filter, dirty fuel lines, leaky gasket. Mackenzie had the man shut the engine off. "There are a lot of people in town today," Shane noted in a shrewd voice. Bentley's gaze cut to his cousin. "Meaning?" "Mackenzie's a one-woman general store and repair garage. She won't have time to fix that man's truck." Shane's smile widened. "You could offer your services. If you're pitching me a job as the town mechanic, think again." Bentley designed boats and built marine engines, some of which cost far more than that truck when it was new. Or at least, that's what Bentley had done until the conditions of his grandfather's will had turned his world upside down. Grandpa Harlan had left his assets to his 4 children, but only if they cut off and fired their kids. The intention was that it would make the grandchildren stand on their own 2 feet. As compensation, Harlan's grandchildren were given second chance in the hopes that they would make something of the town and by extension themselves. "Way to show the love, Grandpa. Or you could go back inside the inn," Shane continued in faux innocence. "But since you came here to Second Chance to help out with." "That's not why I came." Bentley grew increasingly irritable. "You told me Olivia would be here." When will she be here? Shane gave Bentley a searching look. Why can't you just call your sister and get the details yourself? Bentley considered how much he wanted to tell Shane about the rift between himself and Olivia. Nothing. I stopped calling when she stopped answering my calls or replying to my texts. Didn't she spend time with you after her racing sailboat capsized? Shane continued to study Bentley's face. Did you argue, or was there too much going on in your head to question Olivia when she said she was fine? Not exactly, Bentley hedged when in fact Shane was practically spot on with his last guess. Introverts weren't the best at providing emotional support to extroverts. Bentley, someday, a woman's going to need you to step up and get involved, even if her first response is that she can handle everything alone. Shane shook his head. I know you're the family brainiac and human interaction is difficult for you. Bentley saw red. But the fact remains, you need something to fill your days, and it's not just me that could use your help. He nodded toward the truck in need of repairs. Bentley took another look. Is that him then? The man who'd shown up in Second Chance last month claiming to be their long-lost cousin? Tanner? Shane shook his head. No. Tanner drives an older truck, always wears a cowboy hat and has 2 kids under the age of 6. Shane had asked Bentley to come to Idaho and help prove that Tanner wasn't a Monroe and wasn't entitled to any of their inheritance, which, besides the small town of Second Chance, included an ancient chest full of gold that Shane and his fiancée, a local rancher, had found back in April. I still don't understand how I can help. Bentley's gaze kept drifting to the truck, his mind turning over possible diagnoses. You're an engineer, Shane said simply. You approach problems methodically. Who better to prove Tanner isn't our relation than you? The problem would be a lot easier to tackle if Tanner would make an appearance. Bentley hadn't seen the man since he'd arrived. He'll come into town soon. He hasn't been in for groceries in nearly a week. Shane put a hand on Bentley's back and gave him a friendly push toward the truck. Go on. I know you're itching to take a look at that engine. An hour later, Bentley had fixed the truck engine and was tightening the air filter on the old Dodge pickup. He had to admit, it felt good to lose himself in the quiet and the work. Laurel says I need fresh air. Gabby wandered over to the service bay, threatening his peace. She'd changed out of her ballerina costume and into bright purple leggings, a pink t-shirt and red sneakers. She wore earbuds and had tucked her phone in a side pocket of her leggings. Without further ado, she began dancing back and forth across the service bay. Bentley said nothing. His only acknowledgement of her presence was to glance up if she came too close to a wall or the tool-filled shop bench. The door that connected the garage and the general store opened, and Mackenzie stuck her head out. Hey, Gabby. Nice moves. Thanks. Gabby didn't break stride. My Uncle Bentley is the best audience. Bentley contained an eye roll. Not at the honorary title of uncle, but at Gabby's perception of him as being an enthusiastic spectator. Bentley's a good mechanic, too. Mackenzie grinned. Are you still okay out here? I feel bad that you're working on that truck for me. I'm almost done. The carburetor had been clogged, which explained why the engine had been cutting out on the climb up the mountains to Second Chance. It wasn't much in the way of a challenge, and, although he wouldn't admit it to Shane, he didn't mind tinkering. Anything to make the time pass quicker until Olivia arrived and he could apologize for being introverted. Mackenzie went back into the general store. Gabby continued freestyle dancing. And Bentley gave the engine one last inspection. Since Grandpa Harlan had passed away and Bentley's father had fired him, he'd been donating his time to various medical equipment startups in Philadelphia, working on a range of new mechanical challenges from prosthetics to artificial organs. He enjoyed a technical challenge, more than he enjoyed the company of most people. And he was surprised at how working outside his field had helped lift his spirits. An old cowboy and a cowgirl entered the service bay, giving a twirling Gabby a wide berth. The old man stopped a few feet away. The late afternoon sun was at his back and created a classic cowboy outline, wiry body, bow legs, wide-brimmed hat. The cowgirl had a much more intriguing silhouette. The features of both were now in shadow, details inscrutable. Bentley closed the truck's hood. You're the newest Monroe? The old man clicked the heel of his boot on the concrete, shifting the way a horse did when idle. The repairman? The cowgirl made an indistinguishable sound. Bentley's gaze was pulled back to her curves. It was impossible to tell how old she was, how intelligent, how attractive. Actually, I'm an engineer, he admitted slowly. To satisfy his curiosity, Bentley took a few steps to the side, wiping his hands on a used blue rag. With each step, the cowgirl's features came into focus. Bright brown eyes. Long black hair. A delicate face that should have been smiling. I could make her smile. Bentley stepped back, startled by the thought. As a child, he'd been a math nerd, solving equations in his head when he was bored and unchallenged, which was often. As an adult, other than the quarterly Monroe family gatherings and Olivia's races, his work had been his life. In the shop, he didn't make small talk. And in his experience, women like small talk. In fact, they needed it to spark delighted smiles. Make her smile? Bentley had a better chance of boring her with silence. I thought I saw you guys coming in here. Another cowboy joined the pair. This one carried a toddler girl with dark curly hair and held the hand of a little cowboy of about 4 or 5. Gabby came to a standstill, staring at the newcomer warily. Could it be? Bentley moved closer to the trio until he could see the fringe of dark hair beneath the man's cowboy hat and his dark eyes. This had to be Tanner, the man claiming to be a Monroe. I don't think we've met. I'm Bentley Monroe. The cowboy frowned at him. Raymond Diaz. The old man shook Bentley's hand. My granddaughter, Cassie. And this here's Tanner Paxton. Thought you'd know him seeing as how you might be related. At long last. The Monroe pretender. Bentley couldn't look away. We haven't had the pleasure, Tanner said in a cold voice. Since. We have business to discuss, Raymond. I'll head over to the Bar D and catch up with you there. The man claiming to be a Monroe stalked off. If that man was a long-lost Monroe cousin, he wasn't in second chance to become a beloved family member. I hear you fix things, Raymond said to Bentley, unfazed by Tanner's cold shoulder. I was wondering if you'd want to take a look at some carnival rides we've got out at the Bar D. Can't make money off something that doesn't run. Raymond smiled at Gabby but stomped his boot heel impatiently. He must really want these rides to run. Before Bentley could respond, Cassie crossed her arms over her chest. A move that told him she was either anti-Monroe, like Tanner, or not happy with her grandfather's request, like Bentley. I could make her smile. The geek in Bentley still didn't think that was likely. But that was the thing about probabilities. There was always a chance, slight as that might be, that he could. That was, if he could hold a casual conversation with her without sounding like a tongue-tied engineer. You don't have to come, Cassie said in a voice as stiff as Tanner's had been. These rides are antiques and we can't pay you. The last mechanic to look at them said the engines were so old that they weren't worth repairing. Ah. She's not happy with her grandfather's request. Amateurs, Raymond scoffed. Bentley, we hear you're a genius when it comes to engines. A part of Bentley took the compliment at face value. The foolish part, he was sure. But that didn't stop him from accepting Raymond's invitation. It never hurts to take a look. And while he was at the Bar D, he might be able to learn more about Tanner. The fact that Cassie was breathtaking had no bearing on his decision. None at all. Admittedly, I work on newer tech. But you never know what might happen if you give something new to you a try. Oh, she knows. Raymond chuckled, clapping a hand on Cassie's shoulder. She knows, all right. Cassie grimaced slightly, her gaze meeting Bentley's. He imagined he caught a glimpse of emotions in those dark brown eyes, pain, fortitude, strength. And in that glimpse, Bentley felt a connection. There was more to be found at the Bar D than an engine to tinker with and insight into the truth about Tanner. There was this woman. I could make her smile. Bentley was annoyed with himself that the thought wouldn't go away. You could come now, Raymond said, tottering away. Gaze shuddering, Cassie turned and followed her grandfather. Bentley watched her walk off, head high, shoulders back, black hair cascading from beneath a straw cowboy hat. For the first time since coming to Second Chance, Bentley saw something he wanted to focus his complete attention on: her. Not the antique engines. Her. This wasn't like him. Not at all. "Can I go see the carnival rides?" Gabby rushed over, smiling, and said, "My dad says I'm good company." Bentley rather thought dads were required to say that of their kids. "And I know how to get to the Bar D," she added with a flash of intelligence in her eyes. "In case you take too long to accept their invitation."
Chapter 2. "It's a mistake bringing Bentley Monroe here," Cassie told her grandfather as they pulled into the ranch yard with Bentley's gray truck close behind them. "Especially when Tanner is here and so clearly doesn't want to be around the Monroes." A fact Cassie didn't pretend to understand since Tanner claimed to be a Monroe himself. "Monroe business isn't our business," Grandpa said succinctly. "I'll take care of Tanner. You show our Monroe what we're facing." Our Monroe. Bentley. He had a working-class look to him. He wore a navy t-shirt, faded blue jeans and scuffed work boots, the kind construction workers wore with the steel toes. He was tall with dark brown hair and eyes. And those eyes? They were warm yet watchful, as if he missed nothing but cared about what he noted. And yet, there was something proud about the lift of his chin and ramrod straight posture that let Cassie know he had hopes and dreams apart from being a car mechanic. "Actually, I'm an engineer," he'd said. The point stuck with Cassie. No one in the Diaz family had ever gone to college. "He'll probably turn tail and run the moment he sees the rides," Cassie predicted, subtly stretching muscles from back to hip. Grandpa shook his finger at her. "Don't you let that happen. We need the support of the Monroes if we want to stay in town. Gloss over the challenges and win him over. Stop it. The next thing you'll be doing is offering me up as his bride in exchange for his mechanical services." What an idea. Grandpa rubbed his hands together, flashing her his gap-toothed grin. "You're too picky when it comes to men. I prefer to say my dating pool has been shallow." And that Cassie was holding out for head-over-heels love. But had she missed her chance? The older she got, the less she was willing to compromise for any man who was less than her idea of perfect. Not that she had an image in mind. She just had yet to come across someone who she could envision spending the rest of her life with. Now Bentley and those eyes. She climbed carefully down from the truck and glanced around, trying to see the family ranch as Bentley would. A blue, rambling ranch house sat front and center, half hidden behind a screen of aspens, leaves glimmering silver in the afternoon breeze. To her left was an arena and a good-sized barn, which was painted the color of redwood bark. Rhett, Tanner and his kids were clustered by the paint-peeling doors. Beyond that was a bit of land with what looked like a run-down obstacle course. A beat-up mannequin sat in a kiddie ride train engine. Nearby, a merry-go-round horse was propped on a wilted hay bale. All targets for Rhett and his roping students. Beyond that was the large, three-sided second barn, which was tall enough and wide enough to park 3 semi-trucks. The interior was packed with Grandpa Diaz's odds and ends, plus small carnival rides, including a small Ferris wheel, the rest of the merry-go-round horses and metal train cars. From here, Bentley wouldn't see the prettiest parts of the ranch, the small lake on the other side of the rise near the original homestead, the ridge where you could get a good look at the entire valley and the Grand Sawtooth Mountains, or the wildflower-filled meadow beyond the tree line that used to feed 100 head of cattle. The Bar D was the center of her world. Would Bentley think the Bar D had an air of neglect and that the Diaz family could barely keep up with repairs? She was afraid he would. It wasn't tidy and organized like the nearby Bucking Bull Ranch, the most renowned operation in the area. The Bar D was eclectic and full of character, the same as the 3 people who lived here. Stupid pride. It doesn't matter what a Monroe thinks. When she was a girl, Cassie used to dream about what it would look like when she was in charge: neat hedges, green pastures and an indoor arena where she could ride and train horses year-round. She didn't have spare money to plant flowers in the spring, much less the funds to build a covered arena. She made do with a small training paddock and a pasture the size of a traditional rodeo arena. Wasn't life supposed to be about more than making do? Gabby and Bentley joined Cassie just as the Bar D's black and tan cattle dog ran up to Bentley, rose up on his hind legs and planted his big feet on Bentley's shoulders. To his credit, Bentley didn't fall from 80 pounds of canine greeting, although he dropped the large metal toolbox he was carrying to the ground. Ajax. Cassie called the short-haired Australian healer to her side. When he didn't come, she added, "I'm so sorry," before taking hold of his collar and pulling him off, stifling a cry from the white-hot pain that shot from her hip to her leg. Ajax never jumps on anyone. He was more likely to get a case of the zoomies and run circles around visitors, particularly new faces. "My Uncle Shane says animals and kids love Uncle Bentley." Gabby rose on her toes and spun around, landing with her arms out as if Bentley were a prize she was featuring on a game show. "I know I love him." Go figure. Bentley didn't so much as crack a smile. The word curmudgeon came to mind. Can handsome men be curmudgeons? You don't like kids and dogs? Seriously? Cassie didn't know why she was teasing him. Her hip was on fire, and it was time to take an over-the-counter pain pill because she had a to-do list as long as her arm. Bentley heaved a put-upon sigh. "I never said I didn't like kids or animals. I love kids and animals. I plan to have some of my own one day." Despite being curious about that statement, Cassie let it go. The sooner Bentley admitted the carnival rides were a lost cause, the sooner she could get back to horse training and a much-needed paycheck. "Come along then. I'll show you the remains." She led the way to the pasture behind the arena with measured steps that didn't tax her back. Late, but true to form, Ajax began racing in broad circles around them, an unfocused look in his eyes. "What's this?" Bentley asked. "The zoomies, and yes, that's a technical term." Cassie opened the pasture gate. "It's his way of burning off adrenaline and anxiety after meeting new people. He hasn't crashed into anyone on a Zoom since he was a puppy. Give him another minute and he'll be fine." Ajax raced through the gate and began making a wider, slower circle. The afternoon sun made his fur gleam blue-black. "See?" Cassie closed the gate behind them. "He's petering out." As if on cue, Ajax dropped down to his stomach, panting. After a moment, his eyes came back into focus. "Good boy." Cassie gave him a gentle pat on the head. "You've now officially been welcomed to the Bar D. Look what's coming." Gabby pointed her hands in two different directions. "It's like Uncle Bentley is Dr. Dolittle. Uncle Shane knows what he's talking about." A gray tabby stalked out of the second barn toward them, mewing, tail waving smartly in the air. Millie was a fantastic mouser and a consummate flirt. From the far corner of the pasture, Cassie's beloved mare Whistler snorted and began plodding toward them. She was sway-backed and retired, but sweet as sugar. "They're coming to Cassie," Bentley said curtly, looking away. Cassie tended to agree with him, but now that she could see the metal skeletons of the carnival rides, reality of a different kind was setting in. "Do me a favor, Bentley, and let my grandfather down easy after you take a look, will you?" Bentley fell into step next to Cassie. He was a good foot taller than she was, but he kept to her slow pace. "So? You don't think I can get the rides running?" "No. Nor do I think you should try." She gestured toward the barn. "Just look at them. There's rust on everything. Thick as frost. You were kind to come out here, but I'm afraid my grandfather has always dreamed bigger than his arms could hold." Bentley stopped about 20 feet from the barn. Wind-blown wild grass bent and swayed around his ankles. Ajax sat at his feet. Gabby leaned into his side. Millie rubbed against his calf. And when Whistler joined them, instead of greeting Cassie, the bay mare rubbed her head against Bentley's shoulder. Bentley turned a put-upon expression skyward. "You are a Pied Piper, a magnet for kids and animals." Cassie laughed, shaking her head. "I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it for myself." "I told you," Gabby said. Bentley cleared his throat. "Whatever. It's not something I aspire to." And then he gently extricated himself from animals and girl, marching purposefully toward the barn. Why was he so put out by all that affection? Bentley surveyed the barn's contents. "Which engine can I easily access? Maybe the Ferris wheel?" Cassie led him over to it. "It has the most space near the engine." Bentley set his toolbox in front of the Ferris wheel motor and lifted the blue hood over the main engine compartment. "It's electric." "Is there power in here?" "No, but we have a generator somewhere." Cassie headed to the back of the storage barn, moving carefully around boxes and edging between piles of Grandpa's accumulated junk, moving slowly and with care. When she reached the generator, she glanced back. Found it. Whistler lingered just outside the barn, looking toward Bentley. Ajax sat near the man's feet. Millie was perched on a stack of boxes behind him. Bentley paid no one any mind. Gabby knelt in front of the toolbox. I'll be your assistant. Tell me what you need. Crescent wrench. Phillips head. Pliers. I do this all the time for Dad. Who ran the lodgepole in? Bentley grunted, poking around inside the engine. Cassie smiled. Curmudgeons shouldn't be sexy. Yet, Bentley was. Short hair, a dark brown that was nearly black. Strong features, strong arms, strong shoulders. A man of few words, he'd be dependable in a crisis, not that she planned on having any. Who am I kidding? My entire life is in crisis. Cassie turned her attention to the generator, peering at the dials to check the oil and fuel levels. Everything looked ready to go. She returned to Bentley's side, as drawn to him as the dog, the cat, and Gabby. If there's any hope of starting this, the generator is ready. Bentley grunted again, which she took to mean don't bother me. I'm thinking about the problem at hand. Curmudgeon. Cassie bit back another smile. Flathead screwdriver. Bentley held out his hand, as cool and demanding as a surgeon. Gabby dug into his toolbox and handed him the screwdriver without a break in her humming or swaying. She glanced over at Cassie. I'm taking ballet. Did you ever take ballet? No, Bentley answered grumpily before Cassie could, making both Cassie and Gabby laugh. He hadn't realized the question wasn't directed at him. My dad says I can have a ballet bar once they finish remodeling my room. Gabby got to her feet and did apply. You should wait and see if you still want to do ballet next month. Bentley spared Cassie a glance. She only started last week. It's an online class, but I love it. Gabby did another ply, this time extending her arms out and then upward as she rose onto her toes. I'll still be doing ballet 10 years from now. You've seen me, Uncle Bentley. I'm good. Another grunt. Cassie held back a chuckle, leaning on the outer casing of the Ferris wheel engine to ease the pressure on her hip. Both Tanner's little kids joined them. Mia and Quinn had on cowboy boots. Quinn wore a straw cowboy hat and a superior expression he'd inherited from Tanner. Mia wore a wrinkled yellow sundress and a watchful air. She was a quiet child with an enchanting smile, if one could coax it out of her. Ajax extended his long, narrow snout toward both children and then settled back against Bentley's leg. Bentley studied Tanner's kids for a moment before looking up at Cassie. What's Tanner doing here? Tanner's staying up the road at a cabin you Monroe's own. Since he arrived, he stopped by a couple of times. And now, my grandpa and my brother are planning to host a rodeo camp for kids. My brother is a former roping champion who teaches and coaches a little. I think Tanner used to organize rodeos for a county fair in Texas. And my grandfather. He chases any carrot that promises profit. Chasing carrots isn't such a bad trait. That's how my grandfather built his fortune. Bentley's gaze flickered with humor, but only briefly before his attention returned to the motor. His hands were deep in the engine compartment. Metal clanked against metal. At any moment, he'd realize this was a lost cause. I'm Quinn. My dad says you're working on a ride. Quinn stuck his thumbs in his belt loops and rocked back on his heels. But I don't see no seats. The Ferris wheel's egg-shaped cages were stacked against the back wall. Bentley murmured. He says you should pray it runs, Quinn continued. Bentley made no comment, but his eyes narrowed with determination. We used to pray when Mama was alive. Quinn was on a roll. We haven't been to church since. But I could pray for you. Silently, Mia took Quinn's hand. We could pray for you, Quinn amended. Me and Mia. Oh. Gabby ruffled Mia's dark curls. That is so sweet. Cassie echoed Gabby's words. It was sweet of Quinn to offer prayers. But Quinn's sentiments fell upon deaf ears where Bentley was concerned. He just kept on working. Not that any of the children or Ajax seemed to feel snubbed. They gathered around him contentedly, as if he was Santa Claus, hard at work compiling his nice list. Finally, Bentley withdrew from the engine compartment. His arms were streaked with dirt and grease, not that he seemed to care. In fact, one corner of his mouth tipped up. "Can you start the generator?" "I'll give it a go." Cassie returned to the back of the barn. Surprisingly, the generator started on the first try. She doubted the Ferris wheel would do the same. Nevertheless, she plugged in a heavy-duty extension cord and carried the end to Bentley. "No offense, but in case something blows, I'm going to get the kids and Ajax a safe distance away." "Ye of little faith." Bentley waited until she had her charges outside the barn to attach the cord, fiddle a final time with the engine and then hit the on switch. There was a low, mechanical groan, followed by an ear-popping backfire that sent Whistler galloping away and Millie scampering out of sight. After another grinding complaint, the engine roared to life. Bentley throttled the engine up and back. And then he turned toward Cassie with a big smile and a thumbs up, and all she could think was, he could Pied Piper me right into those strong, capable arms. From across the pasture, Grandpa whooped and tossed his cowboy hat in the air. It fell to earth the same way as all his grand plans, without fanfare. But he picked it up and hurried to join them. Cassie wiped the foolish grin off her face and reminded herself that starting a carnival engine changed nothing. Her body and bank account were both still a mess. And curmudgeonly Pied Pipers with mechanical skills could do nothing about either one.
I made her smile. Irrationally, Bentley wanted to make the cowgirl smile again. "Can I go for a ride?" A small voice and equally small hand tugged on Bentley's t-shirt as he powered down the Ferris wheel engine. Mia stared up at Bentley with big brown eyes. "We prayed for you." Holding the side brim of his cowboy hat, her brother hopped around Bentley like an excited bunny rabbit. "We should get a ride." Bentley hadn't paid much attention to the youngsters while he was working. But now their cowboy dad was headed Bentley's way. Shane would be crowing louder than Raymond just had, because here was an in with the Monroe Pretender. The Bar D needed someone to work on the carnival ride engines and Tanner was going into business with the Bar D. This gave Bentley a chance to get to the bottom of things where Tanner was concerned. "Can I go for a ride?" Mia asked again. Gabby lifted the little girl into her arms. "There aren't any seats on the ride yet, Mia. We have to wait until Uncle Bentley fixes it." "Fix it, Uncle Bentley," the little girl said, using a finger to twine a dark curl around her ear. She looked like Bentley's sister, Olivia, when she was young, only with darker hair. "Fix it now." "You can do it, Uncle Bentley." Her brother stopped hopping. When he stood still, he bore a striking resemblance to Shane when he was a kid. What if they are family? What if they deserved an inheritance? Bentley washed a hand over his face, trying to reset his perspective. These kids had a similar look to the Monroes was all. Doppelgangers weren't a rarity. Bearing a resemblance didn't mean they were closely related. Cassie's gaze collided with Bentley's. She stood just outside the barn, leaning over to hold on to Ajax's collar and grimacing. "Can you do it, Uncle Bentley?" And then she let go of the dog and gave Bentley a hint of a smile. A hint of a smile. That's all it took to make Bentley want to forget Tanner's claims and bring the rides back to life, if only to please this cowgirl. It made no sense. No sense. Still, his heart beat a little faster the longer their gazes held. Ajax circled Bentley's feet, bumping into kids and nearly knocking Quinn over. Bentley steadied the boy, noticing a torn seam in the shoulder of his shirt. "He can do it," Mia said solemnly, faithfully, trustingly. Her dress was faded, as if it had seen too many washings. Her cowboy boots had the scuffed look of hand-me-downs. If they were Monroes, someone in the family would make sure they had decent clothes. If they were Monroes. Bentley ignored the thought. He was a man who stuck to the laws of physics and mechanics. Emotion had no bearing on Tanner's claim. And for all their clothes looked worn, the children looked healthy and well-adjusted. Ajax finally settled, leaning against Bentley's calf and staring up at him worshipfully. What had Bentley done to deserve the affection of a dog and 3 kids? Nothing. Elation over getting the engine to start drained away. "I told you he could fix 'em, Cassie." Raymond entered the barn. A few feet away from Bentley, he extended his arm over young bodies and clapped a hand on Bentley's shoulder. His grin revealed missing teeth at one corner of his mouth. "You can stop worrying about making ends meet, girl. We're going to take these rides on the road again. Hang on. I'm not traveling with those rides." Cassie crossed her arms over her chest the way she had back in town. "Why not?" Her grandfather sniffed. "You get to see new places and meet new people. Not to mention, the pay is better than training a horse or two now and then." Cassie's arms drew tighter around herself. "Everything still needs the rust taken off and a new coat of paint. We're very far away from operational. And besides, I signed a contract with Ashley Monroe to train horses for that movie she's making here next year." Cassie was going to work for Bentley's cousin? This was news to him. And impressive. Cousin Ashley was taking the role of movie producer seriously. She wouldn't hire anyone who wasn't highly skilled. "Next year," she says. Raymond shook Bentley's shoulder. "Cassie has work next year. You can make all the rides run now, can't you, son? We could be operating in time for the fall carnival season." "Well," Bentley hedged, glancing toward the rusted Ferris wheel cages. Cassie was right. It would take more work to restore the ride pieces than it would to make the machinery functional. What if Bentley fixes the engines? Cassie tossed a lock of black hair over one shoulder. "Are you going to pay him for his work?" "Why should I?" Raymond shot back. "He's a Monroe. They're like our guardian angels." Bentley was no one's guardian angel. His sister, Olivia, would second that sentiment. "People deserve to be paid fairly for their work and receive a living wage," Cassie said staunchly. "Don't get distracted by this project, Grandpa." The slim cowboy who bore a strong resemblance to Cassie introduced himself as her brother, Rhett. "There's more money to be had with Tanner's rodeo school than your rides. We can talk business later." Squeezing his way into the barn, Tanner took Mia from Gabby and claimed his son's hand. "Not in front of the Monroe." Bentley frowned, finding his voice. "My family doesn't care if you hold a rodeo school or not." That might have been an overstatement. Shane would certainly be concerned. He cared about everything the man who claimed a Monroe heritage did. "Well, I care about keeping the Monroes out of my business." Tanner's words were spiteful even as he walked away. "I know why you're here, and it's not for rides. I was invited." Bentley began packing up his tools, creating a racket that had Ajax edging away. "I never said I was something I'm not." The unspoken accusation that Tanner had Tanner turning back, a dark expression clouding his features. "I know who I am. And I know that sometimes you have to fight with family to get a fair shake." He tipped his hat to Cassie but gave the two Diaz men dark looks. "I won't come back if there are Monroes around." "You need us, Tanner," Raymond said in a voice just as heated as Tanner's had been. "Same as we need this Monroe. People in hard places have to make hard choices, including swallowing their pride." I said my piece. Tanner headed toward the ranch yard and the collection of trucks. Mia stared over his shoulder, waving goodbye to those in the barn. Gabby waved back. But that wasn't the end of the drama. Another argument was brewing. Cassie stomped her foot a little, a move reminiscent of her grandfather's body language. "I'm not getting into the kiddie ride business." Of all the, Raymond shook his head. "Why not?" "Because I'm a horse trainer. And maybe I'm not making big bucks now, but I might get more work after next year." There was something in her statement that hinted at vulnerability. But Cassie turned on her heel and walked away. No one said anything until she went through the gate. "Grandpa, I'm not keen on running those rides either." Rhett put his hands on his hips, which drew attention to his big belt buckle indicating he was a champion roper. "If Bentley can get the rides running, we should sell them." "Sell a moneymaker?" Raymond seemed flustered. "I don't understand either one of you." Bentley latched his toolbox and stood. His job here was done. "Thank you for letting me tinker with a classic. Good luck with whatever you decide to do." He nodded toward Gabby, indicating it was time to go, and then headed the way Cassie had. But. "We need you," Raymond protested. Bentley kept walking, trailed by a menagerie of humans and animals alike. His odd little superpower had never felt so annoying. It makes no sense to fix something when your family isn't 100% behind it. He's got a point, Rhett said. Then get in line behind me, boy, Raymond snapped. I'm doing this for you. You and Cassie. You should do it for yourself. Rhett closed the gate after them, leaving the horse on the other side. At the mare's big-eyed gaze, Bentley relented and returned to the fence to give her a pat, trying to ignore the arguing men. He did the same for Ajax before loading his toolbox in the truck and making sure Gabby was buckled in. Only then did he give the bar D one last perusal. The ranch smacked of faded dreams and the faint whiff of desperation. Even the house, where he thought he saw Cassie standing in the front window. But he'd always been overly sentimental. The Diaz family was probably doing okay and the silhouette in the window was probably just a floor lamp. Chapter 3. I'll be rehearsing again after dinner, Gabby told Bentley as he parked in front of the lodgepole inn. Up close, its thick, round log walls were imposing. I need an audience. And since you're not busy, you can come. The preteen spoke as if Bentley had nothing better to do. And the sad part was, it was true. Bentley wasn't busy. He wasn't needed. At least, his presence wasn't wanted by anyone but animals and children. Things had been different when his twin brother was alive. But now, Bentley held onto the steering wheel as if the truck was moving, not parked and turned off. What was wrong with him? He was used to being the man in the corner of the room, the one too preoccupied with his own thoughts about engine mechanics and a boat's hydrodynamic drag to be bothered with conversation. He was accustomed to being the man who was like a shadow to his more handsome and outgoing twin. Bryce is dead. He had been for over 2 years now. Bentley forced himself to take a deep, calming breath. It had taken the comfort of his workshop at Monroe Machine Works being denied him for Bentley to feel as if he had no place, no purpose that was his and his alone. Since his firing, his volunteer work with startups had been fulfilling, but it wasn't the same as owning a project and being invested in its success. I could buy those rides. He scoffed at the thought. What would he do with them? It was as fleetingly satisfying as making a pretty cowgirl smile. Uncle Bentley? Gabby grabbed the door handle, but instead of getting out, she asked, "Are you coming inside?" Laurel passed by the inn's front window carrying one of the twins, followed by her husband, Mitch, carrying the other baby. If Bentley went inside, he'd just be Uncle Bentley, the children's favorite plaything. Sad sack. That was Bryce's teasing voice in Bentley's head. You should have asked the cowgirl out to dinner. Bentley wasn't that guy. But he was hungry. I think I'll get something to eat at the Bent Nickel first. Wise choice. Gabby opened her door and hopped down. She turned, leaning her elbows on the seat while bouncing up and down on her toes, sending her long, strawberry blonde hair swinging. It's lasagna night here. I read the Bent Nichols sign outside. Your cousin Cam's special today is beef burgundy, which is awesome, trust me. I'll do my geometry homework until you get back. It's only summer school, but I pride myself on getting A's. You want to be best in class? Yes. Always. Math before dance then. Personal priorities. He understood that. Personal standards, Gabby said with a lift of her chin. I set myself high benchmarks. I do, too. Growing up, Bentley had prided himself on getting better grades than his siblings and cousins. And when he'd realized that they had personalities better suited to sports and to the spotlight, he'd become less competitive with them or more competitive with himself, the way Gabby was. Her hours of ballet practice were suddenly less annoying because he understood why she pushed herself. Go get that math done. They amicably parted ways. Gabby ran up the lodgepole and porch steps. Bentley headed for the diner as the sun dipped below the pine-covered mountains to the west. The Bent Nickel was a classic as far as diners went. Checkerboard flooring. Chrome bar stools at the counter. Booths flanking each side wall. Where it veered from being a mere diner was Cam's Specials. He'd once been a chef in a 5-star Las Vegas restaurant. Now he was a family man who ran the Bent Nickel with his future wife and her 2 boys. He claimed it was only temporary, but Bentley could see the writing on the diner wall. No more Michelin stars for Cam. He'd have to be content with the stars in the Idaho sky. I'll take the special, Cam, Bentley said upon entering the near-empty diner. He'd barely gotten settled in a booth when Shane sat across from him. "How'd it go at the bar D?" Shane asked. "Spare no detail." Bentley wasted no time on pleasantries. He told Shane about the rodeo school and Tanner's standoffish behavior toward Bentley. "His kids seem nice. And they look like Monroes." Shane nodded, rubbing his clean-shaven jaw. "Let me ask you this. If you thought you were a long-lost member of a well-off family, how would you act?" Bentley took a moment to think on it before answering. "First off, my lawyer would probably advise me to keep my distance." "Tanner doesn't seem the type to have a lawyer," Shane mused, gaze roaming over the yellowed pictures of Old West trappers hanging from the wall above them. Some of the pictures looked like they'd been taken outside the lodgepole inn. Bentley considered Shane. He used to run the Monroe family's chain of luxury hotels with what was rumored to be ruthless efficiency. But lately, his cousin seemed to have found his heart, just not toward Tanner. Bentley shook his head, returning to the question at hand, how he would act if his and Tanner's roles were reversed. "Second, I wouldn't treat the family like the enemy. Unless, of course, someone had made it clear that I was the enemy." "Like me, you mean?" Shane lifted and lowered one shoulder, guilty as charged. "As the family representative in Second Chance, I asked Tanner for proof. His father's birth certificate should have Grandpa Harlan's brother's name on it, Hobart Monroe. That request was met with silence. And when I suggested a DNA test, Tanner told me he didn't trust us not to falsify the results." "Have you searched for his father's birth records?" "That seemed an obvious place to start. Tanner hasn't told me his father's first name. I assume his grandmother's name is Ruth Monroe Paxton. After my initial search dead-ended, I thought I needed more to go on, like his father's name or birthplace." Shane drummed his fingers on the tabletop. "You know, my soon-to-be grandmother-in-law is a friend of Ruth's. I might be able to find out Tanner's father's first name and where he was born. You tried looking on social media?" Shane nodded absently, glancing at the old photos once more. "Tanner's not social. On the internet or in person." And then his gaze swung back to Bentley. "Why does Tanner want to hold a rodeo school up here? We're at least an hour from the closest cities in 3 directions. It wouldn't be convenient for parents to drive their little cowpokes up here. I held a camp for special needs kids this summer and, although everyone was grateful, the camp was criticized for being held in a remote location. The only reason to start a venture like a rodeo school is profit." It was Bentley's turn to rub his jaw. "Think about it. Up here, Tanner's operating costs would be low. If he holds the event on Monroe-owned land, he doesn't have to pay a facility fee. Money." Shane placed his palms on the scarred formica. "And if Tanner receives part ownership of the town, he'd never have to pay any rental or usage fees for someone's arena. As it is, we put him up in a house free of charge. There were a lot of empty and abandoned homes in Second Chance. All owned by their generation of Monroes. What a scam. I mean, if we drag our feet on this, he could live on the cheap for a long time." To be fair, Bentley hedged, thinking of Quinn and Mia. "I didn't say Tanner was running a scam. If he's unwilling to prove who he is and is out for profit, that is the definition of a scam." Shane slid out of the booth and headed toward the door. A few feet away, he spun around and headed back. "Maybe Tanner doesn't want you out at the bar D every day because he might let something important slip. Something that would prove he's not a Monroe. But what Tanner doesn't know is that you have a superpower." Bentley rolled his eyes. "Shane. And don't tell me it's only kids and dogs that like you on sight. Everybody likes you. You're impassive and non-threatening. If you get close to Tanner, he might tell you things he refuses to tell me." Bentley recalled the way Tanner had walked away from him today, not once, but twice. "I don't think we're going to become fast friends, not to mention Cassie and Rhett don't want to travel around running carnival rides. Which means I have no excuse to be at the bar D." Shane set his hands on the table edge and leaned over, as if imparting a secret. "Gabby texted me that the rides could be adorable." An hour ago, the comment would have dumbfounded Bentley. Now he just nodded. Gabby was smart enough to see past the faded paint and rust. "I suppose if people restore Model Ts, they can restore old carnival rides. I never thought about it that way, Shane said slowly and in a way that practically had Bentley seeing gears turn in Shane's head. This community pulls together. There's a painter in town. And someone must know of an auto body shop nearby. I don't mind giving them a leg up if it ultimately benefits Second Chance. And maybe the Diaz family don't have to run a traveling kiddie carnival. There's a flat plot of unused land near the entrance to the Bar D. I drove by it today while you were there. He tilted his head from one shoulder to the other, cracking his neck. Yes, I was stressing and made a drive-by. But my point is that there's enough room for some rides and a ticket or refreshment booth, and some space for cars to park. The Bar D could market it as a mountain fairyland or Mike Moody's kiddie park. Mike Moody was the stagecoach bandit of local legend in these parts, the man who'd hidden the chest of gold Shane and Franny had found. I'm sure Raymond would love to hear your business pitch. But Cassie, not so much. Shane shook his head. This idea would be better coming from you. A casual thought tossed out by the quiet, ever-likable Bentley Monroe. Bentley frowned. I'm likable because I don't meddle or boss people around. Like Shane was wont to do. Don't argue with my methods when you don't argue with my results. Shane straightened, looking pleased with himself. Yeah, I'd put money on you successfully nudging the Bar D in the direction of opening Mike Moody Land and Second Chance and helping me uncover the truth about Tanner. Cam approached with a steaming plate of beef burgundy and a proud expression. Okay, Bentley murmured in defeat. If the opportunity presents itself, I'll see what I can do. But he imagined opportunities, much like Cassie's smiles, would be rare.
The day after meeting Bentley Monroe, Cassie stared at the kitchen's exposed ceiling beams and tried to breathe through the pain in her hip as she followed doctor's orders. He told her to lie on a hard, flat surface when she rested, and nothing was harder than the linoleum in the kitchen. Nothing was harder. Except ignoring the memory of Bentley Monroe's grin and the knowledge that he thought she was courageous. Yesterday, she'd seen him look toward the house right before he left. She'd been unable to stop thinking of him ever since. Did he find her interesting? Attractive? She found him interesting and attractive. I made water in the potty. Mia appeared at the end of the kitchen peninsula in her bare feet, holding the hand of her older brother, Quinn. The hem of her blue gingham dress was coming unraveled. Watcha doin'? Did you fall? Quinn's blue jeans and red t-shirt were wrinkled and streaked with dirt. His big toe stuck out of one sock. Are you hurt? I can run and find my dad. He and Rhett were making a shoot for the arena. I'm good. Cassie hadn't heard them come in, possibly because she'd been in a painful battle to ease the pressure on her lower vertebrae, and possibly because the kids had left their boots somewhere and weren't tromping around. She rolled over to her hands and knees, took a moment to collect herself, and then stood. Are you hungry? Thirsty? I'll take a cookie, please. Quinn's gaze roamed around the kitchen as if looking for a cookie jar. We don't have any cookies. Cassie had banned all processed sweets from the house when Grandpa Diaz was diagnosed with diabetes last year. They rarely indulged in sweets anymore, although a neighbor had dropped off a bowl of peaches that she planned to make cobbler with. Chocolate? Quinn asked with a hopeful smile. Cassie shook her head and opened the refrigerator, searching for something a child might like. There wasn't much: baby carrots, tomatoes, cheese sticks. Cassie glanced at Mia, who was 3. She wasn't certain that toddlers should eat hard foods. Cheese sticks is the safer choice. My dad says you shouldn't play it safe. Quinn scaled a bar stool before reaching down to help guide his sister into the seat next to him. But I'm not your father. Cassie peeled the plastic from 2 cheese sticks and placed them on napkins for each child. I know that. Quinn frowned. You're a mama. She's a cowboy, Mia said solemnly, pulling the cheese into thin strings. I'm gonna be a cowboy. Cowgirl, Quinn corrected her. You can't be a cowboy if you aren't a boy. You're gonna be a mama. A mama. Cassie had never doubted she'd be one someday. Until now. 10 years ago, she'd been a starry-eyed 19-year-old, thinking that she and Rhett would run the Bar D together and pass it down to their kids and grandkids. And then one day Harlan Monroe had showed up at the ranch, offering to buy them out. At one point, he'd wandered out to the paddock, where she was riding Whistler bareback, wishing the wealthy old man would go away. There's a skill I haven't seen in a long time, he told her, leaning heavily on a paddock post. He didn't look like a millionaire. His white hair needed a cut, and his tan slacks were as wrinkled as the blue plaid shirt he wore. She brought Whistler to a stop in front of him. Generations of Diaz ranchers and horsemen have lived here. If you buy our ranch, I won't be able to pass on the skill. The old man said. When I was your age, I didn't know if I was going to have anything to pass on to the next generation of Monroes. I lived hand to mouth, scraping for every dime. But I knew one thing for sure. When life throws up a roadblock, you can either suck on sour lemons or look for greener pastures. It's up to you to decide what you do next. At that point, Cassie hadn't decided what her next step would be. Grandpa and her parents had done that. And she'd just gone with the flow, assuming life wouldn't change for her until Harlan Monroe died, and her parents went to manage someone else's ranch. That's when Cassie had seen the signs of a much-needed reality check. Much as she loved ranching and working with horses, she needed to look for another way to earn a living. But her first foray towards something different, riding a bull, had thrown up one heck of a roadblock. Now everything was harder than before, more painful and less certain, even things she'd assumed would be in her future, like kids. If the worst turned out to be true and Cassie couldn't have little cowpokes of her own, she needed to pass on her equine knowledge to a younger generation any way she could. Her attention turned back to the two impressionable kids sitting in her kitchen. In the weeks since they'd been coming around, they'd practically become family. Mia can be whatever she wants, including a cowgirl. Cowgirls rock. Cassie served Tanner's kids water in juice glasses. Cowgirls can do anything cowboys can do. Quinn gasped, a horrified look on his face. Cassie made a mental note to talk to Tanner about perpetuating sexist stereotypes. It's true, Quinn. Cassie took an old calendar out from where it was stored in between two cookbooks. Cowgirls are tough. You won't see many cowboys riding a horse standing up or hanging upside down from the saddle. She opened the calendar to January. That's me. She flipped to another page. And that's me. The entire calendar featured Cassie's stunts on horseback. Mom had printed it a few years ago as a gift for Cassie. Although she was proud of her accomplishments, just the memory of the strength it took to perform those stunts made Cassie's back ache. Quinn put the end of the string cheese in his mouth and tore off a bite, very aggressive-like. You were in a circus? Cassie also needed to talk to Tanner about teaching his kids some basic manners. But first, she had to win an argument with a 5-year-old. No, Quinn. I was in a trick riding group. We performed at rodeos and fairs. Cassie stopped talking. She sounded like Grandpa Diaz, reminiscing about the past. Looking back, the past 10 years had been fun, but had done nothing to prepare her for adulting. Did you win trophies? My dad has a bunch of trophies. Quinn tore off another bite of cheese. Sure. Cassie nodded. When I was a kid, I won trophies. And when I got older, I was paid to ride. Quinn's mouth dropped open. If I ride, will you pay me? No. You'd have to be in a riding performance troupe to be paid. And the troupe I was in moved down to Ketchum. Cassie took a bowl of cherry tomatoes from the refrigerator and rinsed them off. She set 3 on Quinn's napkin and 1 on Mia's. Nobody around here performs anymore. Quinn scrunched his nose. We don't eat red things. Don't you have French fries? No. This isn't a fast food restaurant. You'll like tomatoes. We grew them in our greenhouse. Quinn pushed his napkin across the counter toward Cassie, rejecting the tomatoes. After a moment, Mia did the same. I need to have a conversation with your dad about vegetables, Cassie muttered. The back door opened, and 3 cowboys filled the mudroom, followed by Ajax. Rhett pulled off his cowboy boots and set his hat on a hook, as did Grandpa. The dog trotted inside the kitchen, sniffing everyone present before deciding all was well. He picked up his rabbit squeaker toy and flopped onto his dog bed in the corner. Squeak, squeak, squeak. Another great day for the books. Grandpa disappeared down the hall. We have a shoot. Rhett began rummaging around in the refrigerator. Tanner kept his boots on, smiling and nodding toward his kids. You guys ready to go? Yep. Quinn leaped from his bar stool to the floor. Yep. Mia held her arms toward her father. Where are your boots? Tanner asked, not moving from the mudroom. I'll get 'em. Quinn ran toward the front door. Now didn't seem the time to bring up vegetables. Daddy. Mia's arms were still raised, waiting to be picked up. Tanner glanced down at his dusty boots. Cassie, can you bring Mia to me? I don't want to get your kitchen floor dirty. Without thinking, Cassie moved to help. Too late, she remembered she wasn't supposed to lift more than 10 pounds at a time. She bent her knees and picked up the slight little girl anyway, triggering a bolt of pain in her hip and pelvis. Despite Cassie's quick intake of breath, Mia settled against her, making Cassie's heart pang. If I don't get surgery, I'll never have a sweet girl of my own. The bull had seen to that. With carefully measured, painful steps, Cassie carried Mia back to Tanner, stifling a groan when she handed her off. Is she wet? Tanner asked, settling his daughter on his hip. No, Daddy, Mia grumped. No, Cassie seconded. She's fine. Sorry. Tanner brushed a finger playfully over Mia's nose. Cassie just carried you so stiffly. Must be because you're a big girl, Mia. Rhett laughed as he poked around inside the fridge. Cassie's still sore from giving bull riding a try. Older brother humor. Cassie wanted to poke him. Squeak, squeak, squeak. Without getting up, Ajax gave his toy a good shake, sending the long bunny ears swinging against his face. I have a favor to ask you, Cassie. Tanner raised his voice to be heard above the dog toy. He flashed a smile as slick as an icy road. She supposed some women would fall for that smile. But Cassie had grown up around confident, arrogant cowboys of all ages, shapes, and sizes. Tanner's charm and good looks had no effect on her. He was a lot like Rhett, and her feelings toward Tanner fell firmly in the brother camp. Tanner, Cassie said gently. I told you I'm not available for your rodeo school. She could barely saddle a horse, much less teach trick riding. That's not the favor I had in mind. Tanner's smile widened. I was hoping I'd be able to leave the kids here with you while Raymond, Rhett, and I go drum up business for rodeo school. We plan to drop flyers off at feed stores and a few of the junior rodeos happening within a 100-mile radius this weekend. I don't know, Cassie reached out and ran a hand absently over Mia's curls. Young children needed caregivers with strong backs and settled laps. And there was a lot to do just to keep the ranch going every day by herself. There would be no lap to sit in until day's end. Of course, she'll do it. Rhett closed the refrigerator door. You're practically family, and it's just a few days. 5 tops. Can we ride horses? Quinn pleaded. I'll be good if we can ride horses. I'll be good, Mia seconded with that solemn expression of hers. Tanner's kids were adorable and potentially heart-stealing. But the fact remained, Cassie couldn't pick them up or carry them around the way Tanner did. Now was a good time to set aside pride and confess the extent of her injury to her family. Now was the time. Now. I can't. Cassie kept her tone light. I'm going to the Ketchum livestock auction Thursday. We'll wait to leave until you get back, Tanner promised. Or you could come along? Don't take her, Tanner. Rhett laughed, giving Cassie a quick side hug. You wouldn't just have to watch your kids. You'd also have to keep an eye on Cassie. She has the worst sense of direction. Cassie couldn't argue with that. She had a habit of getting turned around in unfamiliar places, towns, fairs, large rodeo competitions, which was both frustrating and unnerving. But there was another reason to refuse the trip. She didn't want Tanner to think she was interested in him romantically. It's best if I stay here. And watch the kids? Tanner asked hopefully. Cassie hesitated. Come on, sis. Rhett gave Cassie a pleading look. We'll only make good money from this rodeo school if we enroll a lot of kids. You know we need the cash. Did she ever? Okay. Cassie relented. You make it hard to refuse. Cassie just hoped she hadn't bitten off more than she could chew. Thanks. It means a lot to me. Tanner headed for the back door with his kids. After Tanner left, Rhett studied the contents of the refrigerator once more. What's for dinner? I don't know. Cassie poked his shoulder. It's your night to cook. It's beanie weenie night then. Rhett tossed a package of hot dogs on the counter and turned toward the pantry. Oh, come on. You're not 12. Cassie had her hands on her hips, thumbs working the muscles in the small of her back. Grandpa needs to eat better. There's chicken breast in the fridge and corn ready to be picked in the greenhouse. Sounds great if you make it. Rhett waggled his brows teasingly. I'll move the hay from storage to the hayloft if you make dinner. Deal. Just don't forget your end of the bargain. Cassie couldn't have managed lifting hay bales anyway. And just so you know, the way to a woman's heart isn't paved with beanie weenies. I know. It's paved with kindness and chemistry. Something their mother was fond of saying. Rhett took a sip of his beer. But make no mistake. The reason I'm single is the same reason you're single. There's no one in Second Chance who strikes your fancy and is as perfect as your hero, Cowboy Campbell. That wasn't true. Bentley struck her fancy. And he was perfect so far. I think Tanner would make Cassie a good husband. Grandpa trundled into the kitchen. They have a lot in common. Cassie shook her head. She couldn't think of a thing.